Our next speaker is Adrienne Shelton. Adrienne got her PhD at the University of Wisconsin last year, and she's now she now works with High Mowing Seed Company, and she's also doing a postdoc with me on intellectual property protection. So the Seed Matters supported postdoc. So Adrienne.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to talk to you today about the collaborative release of Who Gets Kissed, which is an organic OP sweet corn. I've given a couple presentations at conferences like this about the breeding of the sweet corn, and I'm not going to really be talking about that today, but if anyone has questions about how we bred this variety, feel free to talk to me, Bill, Jared, who are here, who are involved in the breeding of it. And I'd be happy to talk to you more about that. But for those of you who aren't familiar with Who Gets Kissed, it's an organic, open-pollinated sweet corn that we developed with and for organic growers. It really got started with Martin Diffley, who's up here in the top right of the slide, an organic grower looking for an OP sweet corn. Bill Tracy's sweet corn breeding program was involved at the University of Wisconsin, and the Organic Seed Alliance. All the folks from Organic Seed Alliance were really involved. This is John Navazio, who is now at Johnny's. Jared, Michaela, Kiki, and Kat were also really involved. It was definitely a team effort. But one of the things that we realized, it took us about 4 or 5 years to develop this sweet corn. We were really excited about it when we thought it was ready to be released, and we didn't really realize what we still had to go through in order to get it released. That was in some ways sort of the hardest part of this project. And so what I'm going to be talking to you today is how we did that. In order to do that, I'm going to frame this conversation in talking a little bit about the economics of plant breeding. I'm not going to go too in-depth into any economic models, but I think it's an important way to think about how we move from that next step of breeding to actually getting these varieties into farmers' fields. From there, I'll talk about what we actually did to get Who Gets Kissed released, and then some of the policy recommendations that I think come out of our experience. And so to start with the economics, when there's been a number of studies that have been done over the years looking at what is the rate of return on investment for plant breeding, and they all vary depending on what economic models were used, what crops were studied, but you can sort of say across the board that the investment in plant breeding, there's at least a 30% or more return on investment in plant breeding, which is quite high. And of course, the trick with plant breeding and the varieties that are developed out of plant breeding is that those returns are really difficult to recoup. And that's for a variety of reasons. One being that, of course, the benefits don't just accrue to the farmers who are growing the varieties, but the processors that are then using those varieties, and then, of course, finally to the consumers. In addition, of course, we all know seed is alive. It reproduces exponentially, and it's easily shared. And, I think, for me personally, probably everyone in the room, these are all fantastic qualities about seed. It's why I'm interested in seed. But when you think about it from an economic perspective, it really creates some challenges on how do we fund this really important aspect of seed. So when you look at some of the private investment in seed, it's not surprising that there's certain areas that private investment really focuses on where they can gain as much return from their investment as possible. So certainly private investment tends to focus on hybrids where you can't save the seed from year to year. They focus on crops that tend to be grown over a large acreage, and they also focus often on crops that allow for strong intellectual property rights, and certainly genetically modified varieties fit well within this model. And I have here a pie chart that is actually quite dated. I think this data is actually from 1994, so it's about 20 years old. But you can see that the major areas where private investment is going is to the field crops that are grown over large acreage and that are also now genetically engineered for the most part. So of course private investment isn't focusing on crops that may have a really strong, really high social rate of return. They generate a lot of positive externalities, but they generate a lower economic rate of return. And so that can include cover crops and small grains, things that help farmers to diversify what they're growing to help to create a more resilient system, but of course don't have a lot of economic benefit off the farm. Perennials, of course, where you might buy the seed once or buy it every 10 years, but you're not buying that seed every year, but of course it's a huge benefit to the landscape. And then certainly applicable for what we're talking about today, crops and vegetables that are suited for organic agriculture. Given that only about 1% of all U.S. acreage is organic, it's just not a large market. It makes it hard for companies to invest in breeding for those areas. And so this is a real classic example of what economists call a market failure, where there's something that has social value that we want to see happen, but private investment does not support it. And so that really justifies public investment in plant breeding for these areas. And that's exactly what we've seen has happened. Certainly Who Gets Kissed was funded mainly by a USDA OREI grant through NOVIC, the Northern Organic Vegetable Improvement Collaborative. Walter was just talking about his projects that also are funded by OREI. And I'm excited to see the new data coming out from the newest State of Organic Seed, but from the last report, 57 publicly funded organic seed or organic breeding projects occurred between 1996 and 2014. So we're getting a lot of public funding for organic agriculture, which is fantastic, but it also causes some challenges when we're moving to the next step of how we're going to release these varieties. So now I'm going to move into the specifics of how we released Who Gets Kissed. And just to reiterate, there were a number of people involved. University of Wisconsin, the Organic Seed Alliance, Martin Diffley, whose he started Gardens Vegan Farm in Minnesota. It was funded by the NOVIC project from USDA, OREI, as well as a small grant that really got the whole thing started from the Organic Farming Research Foundation. So there was a lot of different players involved and a lot of different processes we had to navigate to make sure that everyone was happy in this process. And so for certainly the collaborators, and by that I mean the folks that were involved in the breeding, the Organic Seed Alliance, Martin Diffley, and Bill Tracy, and myself at the University of Wisconsin, we were all very much in line as what we wanted to do in order to get this variety out to the farmers. And we had what I would consider 4 main goals that we were trying to do. We wanted to identify an effective distribution mechanism to get to organic growers across the U.S. We wanted it to be as available as widely as possible. We wanted to be able to maintain the genetic integrity of the variety, especially because it was open-pollinated and at high risk for genetic contamination from GMOs. We wanted to be able to communicate the collaborative breeding process we used, because that was an important process for us, and we wanted to be able to use this as a way to encourage other farmers, other breeders to consider breeding with this participatory method. And we also wanted to utilize any royalties that we could generate from the sale of this variety to fund future breeding projects. And so it was a pretty straightforward path in our mind, from the breeding to the seed production and then to the commercialization of it. But there was quite a big hindrance after we bred it to figuring out how to get to these next steps. And that's because of mainly because of the Bayh-Dole Act of 1980. This was an act that was passed by Congress that allows institutions to patent and license inventions resulting from federally sponsored research. So because this project was funded by a grant from the USDA, and because seed varieties have a number of different ways they can be protected with intellectual property rights, it fell within the rules of the Bayh-Dole Act. And so what that meant was that the Tech Transfer Office at the University of Wisconsin was the one that had the final say over whether we were going to put any intellectual property rights on this variety or not. As a group, the breeders, the collaborators, we were very adamant that we did not want to attach any intellectual property to this variety, but it wasn't really our decision. We were really fortunate in that WARF, which is the tech transfer agency at the University of Wisconsin, was willing to say, yes, we agree with you guys. We also are not going to claim any intellectual property rights. Continue on your way. We give you our blessing. But I just really want to highlight that if that hadn't have happened, that could have really derailed our future process, the rest of the process that we went to. And WARF was under no obligation to take into account our perspective on this variety. It's not a situation where it's a negotiating table and both parties come to it with rights. It's really the rights of the tech transfer agency to say yes or no. And that's something that I'll come back to later. But anyway, we got past that hurdle and we were really excited. So the next thing we decided is that we wanted to produce the seed of this variety. We had identified a grower in Montana that was excited to work with us. He was in an isolated location, so we felt fairly confident that we could maintain the genetic purity of the variety. But once again, our next issue was that even though WARF had given us the right to not claim intellectual property rights on this variety, we still didn't own the seed of that variety to give to a grower to grow on some sort of commercial scale. Fortunately, again, for us, at the University of Wisconsin, there's still a foundation seed program, which has been around for about 100 years. A lot of the land grants still have a foundation seed program, mainly that's used for small grains and other row crops where the seed is produced under a certification system. The farmers that grow the seed are certified, and it helps farmers know that when they're buying certified seed, they're actually getting what the bag said it is. And so thankfully we have a foundation seed system, so they were able actually to contract with the grower Doug Beatty that I mentioned in Montana that was interested in growing it. Wisconsin Foundation contracted with Doug. Doug grew about an acre of the corn last summer, which came to about 1,300 pounds is what he was able to produce. But then that seed was still owned by Wisconsin Foundation Seed. So we still weren't in control of this product yet. But then the Organic Seed Alliance was able to purchase the seed from Wisconsin Foundation Seed. And so finally then that gave us really the full legal authority to then do what we wanted with this variety. And then the final step was to... Okay, I know, I'm talking fast, I feel like, but I'm almost at the end. So then the final step was to commercialize this variety and to figure out how we could get it out to farmers as broadly as possible. We had given samples of the variety to seed companies that were interested in looking at the variety. High Mowing Organic Seeds was the company that came back to us and said, yes, we're really excited about this. We'd love to sell it for you. So we said, great. And they said, but we want to have exclusive rights over this variety. And for us as the collaborators, that was a really hard pill to swallow because we wanted to make it as widely available as possible. From High Mowing's perspective, they said, we're going to put the marketing time into getting the name recognition out there, and we want to be able to recoup some of our investment in marketing this variety. So we came to an agreement with High Mowing that they would have a 3-year exclusive on selling this variety, and after that, other seed companies that were interested in selling it would certainly be able to do that. In addition, High Mowing agreed to purchase the seed that we had produced, of course, in Montana, which was a critical piece of it, and they agreed to give a 10% royalty back to Organic Seed Alliance to support future organic breeding projects. And then finally, they were very willing to collaborate with us on telling the story of this variety, which again was a critical part for all of us, and their willingness to work with us on that has been an important piece of it. And so this year, High Mowing is for the first year they're selling the variety. It's available at their website and through their catalog, and the sales are going great. So we're really excited about this as an example of a commercialization that so far seems like it's working. But finally, I think that looking at, we had some there were some really unique aspects of this release that made it possible because of the certain players that were involved, but I think it also points to some larger policy recommendations when we start thinking about public cultivars and how they should be released. One is that varieties developed with public funding really should be excluded from utility patent protection. I didn't go through all the details of the intellectual property, different forms of intellectual property that are available for variety protection, but the utility patent is really the strongest one out there, and it blocks any future breeding from varieties. And so I think if we have varieties that have been developed using public funds, they need to be available to the public to continue to breed for them. That's sort of a critical piece of it. And so this is something that through the Seeds and Breeds groups, some of the work that the NOSB is doing, we're trying to see if we can figure out how to get this idea out there and more formalized in some sort of legislation. We're not there yet. Next, public cultivars really shouldn't be considered inventions subject to the Bayh-Dole Act, which could allow for more collaborative and innovative releases. As I said in the process, this really could have been easily derailed if the Tech Transfer Agency hadn't agreed with our way of going about releasing this variety. But ultimately, it's really the breeders that have the most intimate knowledge of the variety and the best way to get these varieties out there. And often the tech transfer agencies don't have much understanding of, certainly of the breeding process, of the potential uses for the variety that's been developed. And so if public varieties weren't subject to the Bayh-Dole Act, that would really make things a lot easier for all of us. And then finally, any royalties generated should be used for future breeding projects rather than personal profit. And this is another thing that has really come up as the tech transfer agencies have gotten more engaged in licensing varieties and dividing up sort of the royalties that come in, the income that's generated. Sometimes the income will go to the department, to the graduate school. Sometimes it's actually encouraged that the breeder actually gains those royalties for personal profit. And again, if it's a publicly developed variety, as are a lot of the varieties that we're dealing with in the organic sector, we want that money to go back into future breeding, because we, as we've been hearing certainly from the last talk, that the earlier session, we need more varieties that are bred for organic. So those are my recommendations. Thank you, and if there's time for questions.
Plenty of time for questions. Questions?
The question is, are there any public varieties that are covered by utility patents? Not that I'm aware of. I think that there certainly are varieties that are covered by the Plant Patent Act, but I'm not aware of any that are utility patent at this point. Yeah. Okay, the question is, are there any provisions that prevent a grower from reproducing Who Gets Kissed, specifically this OP sweet corn? And no, there are no provisions. We don't have any intellectual property rights on it, and so this is one of the things that we really want growers to take the variety to continue to breed with it, to develop it. Right. And even the the exclusivity with high mowing, for instance, OSA is selling that seed only to high mowing for the 3 years. But that certainly, there's no stipulation that someone couldn't buy 20 pounds of it from high mowing and then start selling it. There's actually no protection about that.
We would send you a polite letter.
Right, but we have no any legally enforceable mechanisms in place to stop that. Yeah, but we want it to be shared. That's the hope, certainly. Right. So the question is, are there any concerns over maintaining the quality of it now that it's an OP and we've released it, right? And certainly that was a big reason why we wanted to be involved in the seed production. We were even nervous about just releasing the variety to a seed company to produce the seed, because with our collaboration with the grower in Montana, we're able to go out to the site and visit it, to work with him to continue to root it and to improve it even in his field. So that's the way that we've chosen to try to maintain the genetic purity of the variety. And so, but we're not making any claims certainly on how, if other people were to grow it and save the seed. Absolutely, we don't have any control over that. We chose to go this route so that, by telling the story, I think hopefully that will give farmers some assurance that if they're buying the seed from High Mowing, it's the seed that we developed and it sort of has our unofficial stamp of approval on it, I guess you could say.
One other thing along those lines that we thought about and batted back and forth and finally decided not to go that route. And again, it's very complicated because of federal seed trade laws, is trademarking the name, so that anybody can grow it, anybody could sell it, but they couldn't call it Who Gets Kissed. Adrian, you have a few minutes, you could explain why that's a problem.
Yeah, the seed laws are complicated, and you're not allowed to trademark a variety name. You're able to trademark like a series. So we could say, okay, the Who Gets Kissed series, and then we would have another name. So it'd be like Who Gets Kissed with the little TM.
Number one,
right? Yeah. And so that was part of the challenge. We really loved the name that we came up with, so we didn't want to add other things to it. It seemed like that would sort of dilute it. But also with the seed laws, by a seed law, if you're selling a variety, if you were to grow Who Gets Kissed, reproduce it on your farm and sell it, by law you have to call it Who Gets Kissed. So you would have to call it Who Gets Kissed Trademark 1.
Unless you change it.
Unless you bred with it. And so in effect the trademark can be really beneficial if you're really trying to control the consumer. Like you want to make sure that in the market, the co-op or whoever's selling this, that they are using the trademark so that consumers know this is Who Gets Kissed corn, and that seems like it can have some economic benefit. But if you're just trying to control the genetics of the variety to the next level, to the farmer, using the trademark doesn't seem like a useful route to go. So.